are you able to get comfortable that things aren't going to happen exactly the way that you were going to do them? Look at the end results, look at where it's going, and are you able to steer the ship and move it in the right direction without actually, pedaling every bicycle and doing it all yourself?
When you first become a people manager, one of the hardest challenges is to accept that not everything will get done exactly how you want it to get done. That really is the difference between delegation and micromanagement. Do you let people on your team try out their ideas, or do you tell them exactly what to do? That challenge came up again and again in my conversation with this week's guest on the Leadership Launchpad, Brian Manning. Brian is the co-founder and CEO of Xona Space Systems, a California-based company that is building the most advanced, secure, and precise navigation services on the planet to better serve not only the current, but future needs of modern technology across the globe. This great conversation touches on the technical abilities of leaders, how to build trust, and why leaders need to take responsibility for problems, but shouldn't take credit for the successes of their teams. Before we get into the discussion, I do want to remind any new listeners to make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you are responsible for leadership development in your organization and find today's conversation interesting, I would love for you to reach out to me, Matt@bettereverydaystudios.com, to see if there's a way we can help build better managers for your organization. With that, let's get into the discussion with Brian Manning. Brian, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that you said yes to this. I'm really interested in learning more about you, about Xona, about the things you've experienced with leadership. So I'd love to start off with Xona Space. What tell the listeners what you all are doing?
Sure. So we are building a high performance alternative to GPS using small satellites. So that's kind of the quick and dirty. Like I said, quick background on where the company came from. So I came from SpaceX. Our CTO came from Ford, working in their autonomous vehicle division. And while he was at Ford, a lot of what he was responsible for was figuring out what navigation systems exist or are on the horizon that can support the world of hands-free driving and autonomy and all these things. And specifically, how do you very reliably keep these cars in their lane, but do it in all conditions, and even conditions where the LiDAR sensor or radar sensor might be covered in dirt or snow or fog or mosquitoes or all the other things that still exist in the world. And what he's finding is that GPS is the perfect complementary technology to LiDAR and vision, that GPS works best where LiDAR struggles the most. The challenge is GPS, as most people experience, can semi-reliably tell you what road you're on. You get on the off-ramp, maybe it knows, maybe it doesn't.
It's not sure which one you're on.
But in order to really support these vehicles, you need to go from semi-reliable, what lane am I, or what road am I on, to extremely reliable, not just what lane am I in, but even am I in the center of that lane. And to do that, you need to shore up not only the reliability side of things and make it more protected against the interferences and threats, but also get down to centimeter level accuracy. And so we found that those problems are solvable using kind of more of the Starlink approach to GPS, so a large number of small satellites closer to Earth. And so we've developed some pretty exciting core tech that has enabled us to provide high performance, tested it on the first satellite, and are starting to get a lot more user equipment out there and preparing for our first launch of our first production class satellite in a couple months here.
That's really exciting. For some reason, when you're talking, the thing that came to mind was a book I read years ago called The Perfectionists, which is basically like a history of the world told through the lens of manufacturing tolerances. So a few hundred years ago, all we could do was plus or minus a quarter inch, and like that's the best you could get. And now it's like we're within fractions of an atom, and so how much those or go ahead.
Yeah. So you're familiar with Moore's law also, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Of processing. So we've got one here that we've just called it Reed's Law because our CTO, Dr. Tyler Reed's the one that came up with it. That if you look at the precision of navigation solutions over time, it's followed a pretty
Mm,
consistent pattern. And if you go back,
interesting.
it's on like a 30-year ish cycle for the big jumps. And if you go
Yeah.
back, 100 so plus years, you've got celestial navigation, and you know where you are
Yeah.
within kind of several kilometers if you're lucky. During kind of the early part of the 19th century, or sorry, in the 20th century, getting into World War II times, there were like long wave radio broadcasts, and so you can get you're into the maybe hundreds of meters. That went into some of the very early satellite navigation that predated GPS. It was in the tens of meters. GPS has
Mm,
got us into the meter level, but what we're as quickly seeing with all it's not just cars, it's everything else. The other 7 billion devices in the world also are now looking for not just tens of centimeters, but quickly even headed towards centimeters. And we
yeah.
even have people asking about millimeters at this point. So it's we're
Wow.
seeing that trend continue to track down. Like I said,
That's
what we're
neat.
calling Reed's law.
Yeah, I love it because it wasn't until I worked at SpaceX that I really realized just how much manufacturing tolerances drive so much of what you can do.
Yep.
Having tighter tolerances really help, and so I'm sure the same is just having those tight tolerances of where you are at physically. It just really, I'm sure, exponentially opens the doors of like what's possible because of that.
It does, and that's I mean we've seen that in every industry, and that's why there are something like 7 billion GPS devices on the planet. Is that
Yeah.
everything needs to know where it is, and uh, one of our advisors gave us a statement once is like if you wake up from being in a coma, what are the first two questions that you're going to ask? It's where am I and what time is it? And that
Yeah.
those are the answers that GPS provides to the world. And all the machines, they're waking up every single day and trying to figure out what time is it and where am I at. And that precision is
Interesting.
continuing to drive down. That if you ever go through Iowa and like all the straight crop rows, like that's all
Mm-hmm.
precision GPS. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason those things aren't waving back and forth, is that they're using precision GPS guidance to get them nice and straight. And so
Mm-hmm.
those are some of the easier ones to connect with. A lot of people don't realize that most of our banks, power grids, servers all synchronize using GPS. So it's
Yep.
just about everything in the world has a need to know, if it's not where am I, it's at least the what time is it, and the
Yeah.
precision on that continues to drive higher also.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, that's really exciting. Okay, no, this is great. I'm really excited for the future.
Yeah,
So then let's go back a little bit. I want to
sure.
transition into more the leadership side. We talked a week or so ago,
Yep.
and I know your backstory is you kind of started in more of kind of like a consulting company and and stood up in leadership really quickly. Then went back to being an individual contributor, and now you're in a leadership role again. I'd be really interested to know what some of those early leadership experiences were like for you, and what did you learn like from going from individual contributor to people leader back to individual contributor.
Yeah, so the first company I worked at was it wasn't as much it was actually engine manufacturing
Oh,
for
okay,
like
okay.
automotive and forklifts and school buses and things like that. But that being said, it was very different than the aerospace world, and so I moved into being a manager relatively quickly, and frankly without a whole lot of guidance from leadership on how to do it.
Yeah,
It was just we had a hole to fill, and it was there to fill it. And so I again was fairly young and arrogant in many ways also, and figuring it out on my own as we went through it. And this was the transition from that to SpaceX. It was going from being a manager at a company that did generally pretty low risk, high tolerance engineering, things that have the factor of safety can be whatever high number it needs to be because it doesn't matter too much if it's a bracket or a pulley or
yep,
whatnot. And going from that to being an individual contributor at SpaceX, building rockets, where the level of engineering was just way beyond anything I'd seen before. That we don't the factor of safety isn't 5 or 10; it's like exactly 1.1. And if you miss,
yeah,
you made it too heavy, or it breaks.
yeah.
And so it was pretty humbling on that side. I had a lot of catching up to do on the engineering side.
Mm,
I also had a lot of learning to do on the management side, though, and it was a very different I guess, promotion mentality and even just culture at SpaceX. And I guess my experience at SpaceX is that they tended to promote the highest performing technical individual contributor. So you take the smartest guy and you
Yeah.
make him the manager, or smartest girl and make her the
Yeah.
manager. And in my previous life, what I'd seen is, and part of why I think I ended up in the management position previously is that you take the best organizer and you take the people that know how to,
Mm.
play all the pieces together that can run the orchestra, and you put them in the management position.
Hmm.
And for a long time, and even in the earlier days at SpaceX, it frustrated, and it never made sense to me. It's like, why would you take the highest performing person and take them out of that
That
output that they're
role.
giving
Yeah.
and make them just go do a bunch of HR and people management? Why don't you take the people that know how to do HR and people management and let them manage all the really good people?
Yeah.
Um, and it was interesting to kind of see. I will say my opinions on that have shifted,
Okay.
and I understand both sides of it now much better. I think what we saw at SpaceX, or what at least I saw, is that in some cases you'll have the best technical leaders. There, I mean, we've even seen it here at Xona, may be resistant to moving up until they get into those positions and realize, well, okay, this is actually really valuable that I have a bunch of force multipliers. And
Yeah.
by taking the best technical people and putting them into a leadership position, what you're doing is making everyone around them, you're taking that big knowledge base and making everyone around them better. And so, sure,
Yeah.
you might be taking the person that gets, you know, 1.5 times as much work done as everyone else and taking them out of doing the work themselves. But now everyone below them, they're able to train. And so now you're getting, 1.25 times as much work out of 10 people.
Yeah.
And just because they're that much efficient, they're that much smarter, they're that much better. And the people that seem to really excel were the ones that were able to make that jump and figure out how to utilize the force multipliers and communicate and work with them. um, some people are not able to make that jump.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's I can definitely see the value in it, where if you have the orchestrator, they may be able to organize those resources, but they may struggle more. And if you're not the expert, it might be tougher to actually grow and mature those resources as much as
Yeah.
having the best guy in the room or best girl in the room be able to do it directly.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And at least in, also reflecting on my experience there, I feel like SpaceX has a bit more of a, sink or swim, like high. They're okay with a lot of churn.
Yeah.
And, we probably both know people who went from, you know, brand new engineer to director in 5 years. Like that's possible
Yep.
simply because if you can make that leap and do it successfully, then they just keep pushing, 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 and they're okay. It's not like another, many other companies that maybe don't have as much churn. They have to be much more careful because once you put somebody up there, well, now they're going to stay in that position forever, whether they get it or not. Whereas in a culture like SpaceX, if they don't get it, then they just get removed or they opt out.
Yeah, that's very true. The churn there isn't just the low levels; it's churn at all levels, moves pretty
Yeah,
pretty quick. So
yeah, yeah. So learned a lot about leadership, and those. I love that you kind of highlighted those two different kind of ways to view leadership or reasons to promote people into leadership roles. As you move at Xona, like how do you think about it now? Looking at who you're trying to, how are you picking out people to move them into more people leader roles from technical roles?
yeah, so I guess my as the CEO here now, my job has transitioned a little bit from building a technical leadership team to building a company leadership team too.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so trying to be the, I guess, smartest person in the room on all things required to build a company is just not a practical
yeah,
mentality to take.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so a lot of, I think, my I guess job here is it's know what you know and know what you don't know, and know where you need to fill those
Mm,
holes, and where do you
mm-hmm.
need to bring in people that are smarter than you, that know it better than you, and then trust them
Mm-hmm.
to tell you how to do it, instead of trying to drive it the other way around a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been more the mentality is, I like I said, I know what I know, I know what I don't know. I come out of the engineering world. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of pieces to running a company that, I have an MBA that supposedly that means I know something about finance, but I certainly need help there.
Yeah.
Organizational side, like realistically, it's all pieces of the company. And as we've been growing more and more, it's been, I guess, my job is stepping out more and more of the day to day things and effectively
Mm.
focusing on building the team, and focusing more on the external relationships also to make sure that the team has everything they need, including money, to keep driving forward.
Yeah. How has that I'm sure it's an evolution. How has that process been? Because I know one of the first things that I hear from a lot of engineers, the challenge of making that jump is going from in the weeds day to day, being the expert. How has that transition gone for you personally? Like, what are some strategies that you've had to be able to remove yourself from it and be okay with that?
Yeah, it's something that I'm still learning as we go
Yeah,
and
yeah.
grow. I think part of it is trying to find the right balance of, I guess, autonomy and guidance to grow the
Mm-hmm.
team, and accepting that
Mm-hmm.
there are going to be things that are done in a different way than I might have done them myself.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's going to be worse, and a lot of times that's going to be better also,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not the
Mm-hmm.
expert in these areas. And
Yeah.
it kind of comes to growing, I guess, trust, and focus within the organization. And so, for me, it's what I'm a lot of times I'll try and find myself asking or step back and say, okay, does this, if I'm getting in the weeds, like, do I need to know this or do I just want to know this? Like, is it the engineer in me that just
Mm.
wants to know the answer because I'm a curious person by nature and I want to know the answers to things? Or is this actually like a detail that there is something that's pushing this? And if I feel like I need to know the detail, okay, is that because there's some bigger issue here, or is it because I don't trust the person that's communicating the higher level things? And if
Yeah.
that's the case, then the real issue here isn't that I need to know the detail. The real issue here is I need to build trust, within the team, and that goes both ways also. And so it's, I guess, managers, leaders, and technical organizations, I think they do need to have enough technical knowledge to be able to raise a flag when you feel like something
Mm.
is heading off the wrong direction. And I
Yeah.
think I think that's why engineers tend to do generally well in management positions, to know,
Yeah.
okay, this is going the wrong direction. But at the same time, it's that balance of autonomy and guidance. You can go you can go too far in either way. Because if you're over managing, people are never going to grow. That if you don't give any sort of autonomy and let people, again, do things their own way, good, bad, different, make mistakes and learn from them, they're never really going to grow and mature. And I mean, if you're just
Yep.
micromanaging, all you have is task rabbits. Like, you don't really have much growth that's going to be happening in the organization. But at the same time, like, if you step out of it completely, you need to at least have the right level of guidance and or oversight to make sure that we're not heading on a cliff, or that the folks are still driving in the right alignment with the greater needs of the organization, but
Yeah.
doing it in the way that they need to. And so that, again, even at the leadership level at this point, I think that's the same for VPs, is the same for directors, the same for managers, that
Mm-hmm.
hire smart people, let them tell us how to do the job, but you've got to make sure that they're doing it in accordance with the greater alignment and strategy, and driving the company in the right
Mm.
direction.
That makes a lot of sense. This idea comes up a lot when I'm, of how to find that balance, and this idea of being technical enough, being in the weeds enough that you can raise flags is kind of the right level. Might kind of put you on the spot, so feel free to say if you don't have an answer to this one, but because I have to believe that it's really hard to know where that level is, and you maybe think you know enough to say yes or no, but really you're just saying yes to things because you don't know enough. Have you ever had an example where you didn't know, you got too removed and a decision went poorly because you were too removed?
Um, yeah, it kind of comes back to the trust side of things. Also, I think that
Okay.
And I think that
Yep.
trust builds over time. That the more that
Yep.
you build trust in the team around you, and the more that they trust you, the more that I don't ever feel the need. And I think with most folks, they'll drill in a few times and maybe even occasionally, but when
Mm-hmm.
you start to drill in and realize that like everything's happening exactly as you'd expect it to be happening and clipping along, you don't really feel the need to do it again after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I think that's part of. I think there is some level of digging
Oh,
into the weeds that helps kind of build that trust also. Um,
yeah.
and but again, there's a also learning that at a executive level, there's proper ways to do that and improper ways to do that. And for example, if you're going to go sit in a meeting with a team and just override whatever
Mm.
your direct reports are doing, that's just crippling them and really
Mm-hmm.
damaging their authority and their ability to make decisions and be leaders. And that's not helpful to their growth. And so that's something I did too much early on, and trying to dig in. And in my head, it was is helpful in giving my opinions, but also realizing that that was not a beneficial to the greater team.
Yeah.
And so as part of that, stepped out of meetings. But yeah, so there's still things like that that like I said, I'm still learning and growing as a
Yeah.
manager. Also, as I think most people
Absolutely.
do throughout their entire career.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely like been mistakes, and those are some of the bigger lessons that I had of
Yeah.
even when I'm trying to help, you have to managers, directors, anyone in leadership positions have to understand how every action, every comment they make, especially with direct reports and like 2 levels or 3 levels down, how that is viewed and what that does for setting a culture, and just for setting a leadership style throughout an organization.
Yeah. 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 And I'm sure it's something that just will, as the level of Xona continues to change, the level of leader, just as the organization grows, it's, there's just the lessons keep getting bigger and bigger, I'm sure.
They do, yeah, and some of those lessons are nicer to learn when you're a little bit smaller, because I think
Yeah.
that the bigger you get, the more painful they get when they hit you. So
Yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure. And so since you have that view of looking at the organization as it's been growing, when you've had new leaders step up or people make that transition, what are, from your point of view, what are some of the most common stumbling blocks that you see at some of the like frontline levels of leadership in, and whether it's in Xona or things you've seen at SpaceX or other places?
sure. Ooh, yeah, I'd say it kind of comes back to finding that right balance and being able
Mm-hmm.
to communicate, and like, are you able to step out of the weeds, and are you able to get comfortable that things aren't going to happen exactly the way that you were going to do them,
Mm.
and look at the end results, look at where it's going, and are you able to steer the ship and move it in the right direction, without actually pedaling every bicycle, and doing it all yourself. And
Yeah.
that's I think it's a big difference on how you were able to grow the team. And this is where back to the managers, that to me the mark of a really good manager isn't necessarily, you almost don't have to look at them, you have to look at how well is everyone around them doing. And if
Absolutely.
the whole team is really clipping and everybody on this team is doing extremely well, um, it usually says something about how that team is being managed and organized. And this is, like 360 reviews I found are incredibly important. And I learned this lesson at my first job, that it was a larger organization, and we had some folks that were, I guess, very focused on taking credit for their team. And so the
Hmm.
management levels above them thought that they were all stars, but the people below them just were not fans.
Yeah.
And I saw other people who were very good at giving credit rather than taking credit, and saying, okay, and bringing their people into meetings, giving credit to the organization and credit where it was due for the people that were doing the work. And it was interesting to see I will say, unfortunately, that first type of person has those people exist in the world, and a lot of them are very good at rising the ranks because the people above them think they're great, and the people below them just hate them.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've been very cognizant of at Zona, and that's why we do 360 reviews and make sure that we're getting
Nice.
feedback from both sides. And to me, that's equally a red flag in management. That if there is is it asynchronous feedback, and whether it's one way or the other, like either
Yeah.
side is some sort of a flag that needs to be paid attention to. That there should be some
Yeah.
level of consistency across it. So
Yeah, I think seeing those differences is really important in a lot of different angles. At the last company I worked at, our review system, we didn't do 360s really, but one of the things we did is, both yourself and your manager would rate you on a bunch of different things. And one of the things that we always told managers is look for big deltas. If you both think this, if you're both grading this, if you both have the same grade, then like, cool, we're good. Like we're all, whether it's high or low, we're all in agreement of what's happening here. But it's those big deltas that are a big deal. And I remember when you were talking about kind of taking credit for the team. So I'm also in the reserves, and there was about a year ago, I was doing some reserve duty where we were kind of our reserve team supports a bunch of different teams in the Space Force, and so as part of our duty one weekend, we were just basically getting briefings from all these different team leaders on kind of what their team did. And one thing that just struck me at the end of the day was the difference is that some leaders said we and some leaders said I.
yeah,
And I've just always wanted to dig in. Because I have no idea the performance of these individuals, so I have no idea if they're actually taking credit, or maybe the people that
sure,
say I are really great leaders. But I would just love to do a deep dive, like research project, just into that of, do you say
yep.
I or do you say we when talking about the team's accomplishments?
It, yeah, I've caught myself saying I, or I've even said like my investors before, because like I'm the one that interfaces with
Mm,
investors, and every time I like when it comes out of my mouth, I'm like, why did that happen? That sounded wrong and felt
yeah,
inappropriate. Um,
yeah,
and because it's yeah, the only way that I'm able to communicate anything to our investors or to anything about our team's accomplishment is because of what they've done. That I can communicate it. I can say I for that, but
yeah,
it's there's nothing there without the team and that we've built here.
yeah,
So yeah, and similarly, like I don't think we've had any issue or problem here that I can't trace back to like if there's something I could have done better to prevent just about
yeah,
anything that's happened, whether
yeah,
that's technical issues or personnel issues or communication issues or investment issues. So like I can always trace back to there's something that I could have done better, and would that have prevented it? Maybe, maybe not. But I do think there's a way to look at the eyes on that side of the thing, though,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
what could I have done better on that side? But yeah, like I said, I've caught myself saying I for the team before and been annoyed at myself for doing it, and because it's to me it's not an appropriate thing to do. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's kind of it's a bit of a Jocko Willink kind of extreme ownership bit too of
yeah,
where it's like take all responsibility but no credit as a leader
yeah,
in some ways.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it comes across like the watching. It's interesting to watch similarly like on panels, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I always remember I guess it's a little bit offshoot but related. There was a panel at one of the space shows a while back, and there was I'll just leave it generic. There was five different executives from five different companies, and four of them were just throwing bombs at each other, and it was very much like unlike the other companies on stage, here's how great we are at this.
Yeah.
And one of them just very calmly is like, "This is what we do. This is what we're good at," and they stayed right in their lane. And I was so much more impressed, and that's I was kind of realizing it ties a little bit to the taking credit, but like throwing shade goes the same way. That if you're
Yeah.
any time that you're like throwing shade on anyone else, most people don't realize like you look every bit as bad as who you're trying to throw the shade on, and it covers both sides. And like I always remember that panel and how impressed I was with the one CEO who stayed right in their lane, and like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, that's the role model on how, how we need to act.
Yeah.
And that there's a lot of times where like to I've certainly been heated and wanted to make comments and generally hold my tongue on those based on
Yeah.
remembering that lesson. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. One final question that I'd love to kind of close out with is for you. So you're leading a growing space company. When you think about kind of the frontline leaders in your organization, what do you see as the primary role of those frontline managers?
Yeah. So frontline managers in my head immediately goes to like team leads or people that have a small group driving them. I would say that their team leads and managers are expected to organize and lead the team in their functional area and be the experts in the needs of that area,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
but also be an expert in how that area affects and interfaces with other areas and other parts of the company. And
Yeah.
the reason I'm leaving that broad and just saying area instead of being a little more specific is that could be a software manager knowing how their software impacts and interfaces with the satellite bus and the payload.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it could also be a sales manager who is getting feedback from their team, from customers about a
Yeah.
desired feature that the customers want, and
Yeah.
they're expected to be able to communicate that into the product team to understand, okay, if and when this can be provided, what can I communicate back to the customers, and owning that piece of it. So um, yeah, I think the defaulted it's easier to connect into the engineering side, but be the expert in your area, know how to organize and drive the team, but importantly also know how that impacts everything around you and the rest of the company also.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that second segment is so big, is like being the bridge between like your individual team and the rest of the company, and vice, go transferring information both ways. I like that. Awesome. Well, this has been great, Brian. Any big milestones coming up for Xona? What should people be looking out for in the near term?
Ooh, there's yeah, it's been exciting to see with the first production class satellite going up here. It actually just passed some of its big testing milestones, so it's heading off to the launch site
Excellent.
shortly.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
that's going to give the world and all of our receiver partners that have already built user equipment the chance to just see what we're capable of. And so,
Yeah.
we're starting to sign more and more customers and partners who are excited to be able to do testing with this thing and just show
Yeah.
off the capabilities that our service has. And so, we proved a lot of the core tech on our first mission a couple of years back, but this is the first time that we'll actually be able to provide kind of a beta level test service directly to customers, which will be a pretty exciting milestone, not just for us, but really for, I think, the satellite navigation world of starting to mark, I think, a shift over into commercialization, just to align the needs of the users with the services they're being provided. So
Yeah.
yeah, should be an exciting year here for us.
Excellent. Well, I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you again so much, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the time.